Welcome to Japan Sports Stories. Every fortnight, join me, Mike Salter, and my co-host, five-time Paralympic gold medalist Noel Thatcher, as we search for the most interesting stories of Japanese sport in the run-up to next year's Olympic and Paralympic Games. Every week, we'll be joined by athletes, academics, and sports professionals who will be shedding light on the untold stories in Japan and sport.
Welcome, everybody. Yokoso. Our first guest is an incredible person, brought up in Kenya, studied Oxford University and the London School of Economics, went on to represent Great Britain in 2 Olympic Games, finishing 6th in the Beijing Women's Marathon, Britain's second fastest ever female marathon runner with a personal best of 2 hours, 23 minutes and 12 seconds without any assistance from funny shoes. It is Mara Yamauchi. Mara, thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us today.
Hi, and thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your first episode of this new podcast.
Koe desu. It's an honor. It's an honor. We are humbled and very, very, very grateful.
So I guess the first thing that we should ask you, Mara, is how have you been coping during the lockdown?
It's been a bit mixed. At the beginning, I thought, wow, this is, life is completely changing. I really need to adjust my life, make the most of it. So I've been running quite a bit. Thankfully, we've been able to exercise, outside, which hasn't happened in other countries. So I'm very grateful for that. And quite a bit of the work that I had planned was cancelled. So I was due to commentate for the BBC at the London Marathon. I was due to commentate on the World Half Marathon Championships, which were due to take place in Poland in March, and then sort of individual coaching appointments. That all went. However, I have got new work in its place, so I've been doing a food blog for the World Athletics website, which has been fantastic. It's kind of challenged me a little bit more on the cooking front, and I really love cooking, so that's been really good. And there have been a few Japanese-inspired recipes in there as well. And I've also finished drafting my first book, which I've had on the go for many, many years. And when I'm in normal circumstances, when I'm coaching and doing other types of work, I don't really have enough time to devote to it. So lockdown has provided that. And now I'm at the stage of finalising it and editing, trying to find a publisher, and so on. So lockdown's been quite productive.
Which is great to hear. And I probably did you a disservice in my introduction because, yes, you have been, international marathon runner and diplomat, and now coach, public speaker, motivational speaker, cook, foodie, author, multilingualist, translator. So we are, truly honoured to have you with us today. So today's focus is, and really the focus of the entire podcast series is going to be on Japan. But if we can start a little bit further back from there, I think Mike has some questions about how it all started out for you.
Obviously, you grew up in Kenya when you were very, very young, but rumours are you played lots and lots of different sports. Is there any reason why you stuck with long distance running?
Yeah, so when I was a child, I did lots of different sports. I did swimming. Later, I did netball, hockey, tennis, rounders, a little bit of athletics. So I was very much an all-rounder. But when I was a teenager, I understood that long distance and endurance events was what I was good at, not sprinting. So I did running a little bit when I was a teenager, and I discovered I was quite good at it. I guess discovering a talent for it and also really enjoying it was what got me into distance running. And then just as I was about to go to university, my father, at an event at my local running club, there were members of the university running team there, and he took one of them aside, kind of behind my back, and said, "Please ask Mara to join your team, because if I tell her to, she won't listen." So it was a little bit devious of him, but it worked, and I joined the team and I started training seriously, and I really fell in love with running then because I was improving.
I was going to ask, because you come from quite a sporting family, don't you, as well? Your sister was world champion rower, if I'm not very much mistaken. And your dad, didn't he have a record for running up and down or ascending and descending Kilimanjaro? Have I got that wrong?
No, that's right, Noel. So sadly, he passed away last October, and one of the things about him which we've been remembering is his running. He was a keen marathon runner, although he took it up relatively late in life. And when he was living in Kenya, one of the things he did was run up and down Mount Kilimanjaro, and he briefly held the record for the ascent and descent. So yeah, he was a keen runner and quite a keen mountaineer as well. And my mother was a very keen tennis player, and my sister was a world-class lightweight rower. So yeah, I guess, I mean, living in Africa when we were children, it's conducive to being very active and being outdoors. The weather is nice all year round, and we also were living at altitude. So Nairobi is at about 1,600 meters above altitude. So it was very conducive to us growing up loving sports rather than indoor activities.
On that note, living in Kenya until you're 8, how do you think that changed your worldview as you grew up, being exposed to a different language, different culture, and then coming back to UK? Do you think that had any part to play in your sort of career choices and development as an athlete and even as a diplomat?
Oh, definitely. I think it had a big impact. So I had experience at a very young age of a country which wasn't my own country. So I've always been a British citizen. My parents are both British citizens. My father did take Kenyan citizenship for a time, but he was born and brought up in the UK. Experiencing another culture and meeting people who are unlike yourself, I think, was really important. As we've looked at protests about racial injustice recently, it's really come home to me that I think humans are inherently tribal. We feel comfortable with people who are like us, and that makes for a lot of problems in our multicultural world where we can all travel to different countries. And I think to overcome that, or to at least understand it in yourself, you have to spend time with people who are unlike you, whether that's on race, gender, disability, whatever it might, social background, whatever it might be. So I think living in Kenya at a young age exposed me to people who were different to myself, and I'm very grateful for that. And it also gave me a love of travel, and that's, I think, why I opted to join the Foreign Office when I was looking for a job. So I had an interest in travel and I wanted to live overseas. So that, and also, I mean, Kenya is a developing country, so I was exposed to people living in poverty and saw people with a very different economic situation to myself. I'm not saying that's turned me into somebody who really understands racism or poverty or development or whatever, but it just exposed me to
Sure.
experiences which were different from my own personal life.
Absolutely brilliant and very pertinent to the world which we now find ourselves living in. So we have some questions about Japan.
Yeah, so you came back from came back from Kenya at 11, and then went on to Oxford for your PPE undergrads, and then LSE for your masters. How did Japan come into your life?
Yeah, so sorry, I came back to the UK when I was 8, but when I was 11, that's really when I got the bug to become an elite athlete. That was when the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics were on. The way Japan first came into my life was thanks to the Japanese embassy in London and their Japan Information and Cultural Centre. So they organised an essay contest for young Europeans. And I saw an advert I believe it was in the newspaper, for this essay contest. The prize, which was awarded to 75 different young European adults, was a 2-week trip to Japan, paid for by the Japanese government, like an educational visit. And I thought, Japan is a faraway country. I was a student, I had no money. There's no way I could go there off my own steam. So I thought, wow, this is something I've got to enter this. So I wrote this essay and sent it off. Wasn't necessarily expecting to be chosen, but I was given one of these 75 places. So I went on this free educational holiday just before I joined the Foreign Office. And it was a fabulous trip. It really opened my eyes to Japan and how other people live. And I think that was the first step of me falling in love with Japan, because I just really loved how people really devote themselves to a task, whatever it is, so hardworking, really do things properly, bend over backwards to be hospitable to foreigners. You know, I really found it fascinating. In that trip, we visited Tokyo, Kyoto, Hiroshima, and then I think on a free day, I visited Kamakura, I think, and we also had a homestay. And we had lots of lectures and visits to museums and so on. So it was very much a serious introduction to Japan. And when I joined the Foreign Office, I thought, right, if Japan is on the list when it comes to choosing postings, I'm going to bid for it. So after my first year in the Foreign Office, the postings list came round. We all had to choose 5 postings, and then we were allocated one of those 5, and Japan was an option. And the job that I applied for required Japanese language training. So not only could I bid to go to Japan, but I could also bid to learn Japanese at the taxpayer's expense. And I thought, this is Japanese is not a language that is easy to learn, or, you know, quick,
or cheap to learn,
or cheap, or anything. So I thought, this is another opportunity I cannot pass up. So luckily I was put on Japanese. I was allocated Japan, and I was put on Japanese language training. And then I spent 4 years in Japan as a diplomat. And then I returned to the UK for 3 years, and then spent another 5 years in Japan as an athlete. So at different times, there have been different links with Japan, but it all started with the Japanese embassy in London's essay contest. And that trip really changed my life forever. So I'm extremely grateful to them that they had that essay contest.
The small aside, Mara, do you remember what you wrote the essay about?
Yes, I wrote it about nuclear weapons, which, becoming a diplomat for the UK, which is a nuclear power, was perhaps a bit, not the official line, let's say. But I wasn't, in the essay, I wasn't calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. I was saying, I think the question was, how can the UK and Japan work together to create a better world in the future? Something like that.
Perfect.
And I thought the UK as one of the world's few nuclear powers, and Japan as the only country which has been the victim of a nuclear attack. Our two countries have a special place in, at the very least, educating people about nuclear weapons and their impact and their cost, and how you manage them, the possibility of abolition if that would ever happen. So all these questions around nuclear weapons, that's what I wrote about.
Fantastic. So getting back to those first few days, hours in Japan. I mean, I can remember my first hour in Tokyo like it was yesterday. Just the strangeness, and I think Japan has that ability to really, you know, it's that sensory overload thing going on. And I can remember getting off a bus in Shinjuku, not being able to see very well because I'm visually impaired, not understanding a single word of what was being said, and not being able to read anything. And I think it just totally captivated me, the strangeness and the sort of alienness, but the excitement, all blended into one. And what were your first impressions? And were there any kind of cultural challenges, shall we say?
On that very first trip I went on through the essay contest, because we were looked after by this program, this official Japanese government program, that trip was quite easy, if I'm honest. We were put up in a hotel, we were taken on a bus everywhere. We didn't really have to think for ourselves too much. So it was fascinating and, you know, totally new culture to me. But actually it was quite easy. What was perhaps more difficult was when I went back for the second time when I was in the Foreign Office and starting my second year of Japanese language training. So this time I was going there to live for 4 years, and I had done 1 year of Japanese language training, so I knew a little bit, but not that much. And that I found really bewildering. So I was there, I supposedly knew the language, but there was so much I didn't understand. I had all sorts of experiences, like putting my rubbish out on the wrong day or in the wrong compartments. I know. Going to the supermarket and buying something which I thought was X, but I would get home and open it and it was Y because I couldn't read what was on the packet. And
what did you buy? What did you buy? What did you come home with?
So I thought I was buying a tin of sweet corn, but I bought a tin of sweet corn puree.
Oh, nice.
I mean, there were loads of occasions like that when, you know, just going to the supermarket was quite a challenge. And then there was a time in that first year when I found simple daily tasks a struggle. So understanding the rubbish system, or going to the supermarket, making a phone call, going to the post office. But I was there to learn Japanese. I had to just persevere and try to understand it all. And there were times when it was difficult. Just because every day was hard. But thankfully, I completed the course, and then I worked at the embassy, and I was in a job which required Japanese to be used every day. So my Japanese improved quite quickly, and then it was wonderful being there, speaking the language and being able to make Japanese friends and really understand the country more. That was much better.
So with your aspirations as an athlete, how aware were you at that point? So you went to with it FCO, was it 98?
Yes.
So I mean, Japan as a, well, tell us what Japan's like as a running culture, as a marathon culture. I mean, were you aware of the incredible history and heritage of Japanese marathon running and distance running at that point?
In short, no. So in 98, I went with the Foreign Office. I was a diplomat. I wasn't really a runner. I was a recreational runner, but I was going there to work as a diplomat. So, but I lived near Yoyogi Park, and I often saw runners in Yoyogi Park. And I knew a little bit about Japan's prowess in distance running, because while I was there, the 2000 Sydney Olympics happened with Takahashi winning the gold medal. But I was totally focused on my work. I did run, you know, at a recreational level, but I wasn't really aware of how good Japan was in distance running. Then the second time I went to Japan was 2006, and that was the start of me becoming a full-time athlete. I knew about Japan as a marathon superpower. The Beijing Olympics were coming, so I was going to be living quite close to Beijing, and that was partly why we moved to Japan, so that I could go and recce the course and experience the hot weather in Beijing and so on. So at that point, I became aware. Within a week of moving to Japan that second time, I ran the Marugame half marathon for the first time, and I finished third. Noguchi Mizuki finished second.
Okay.
And Fukushi Kayako won it in an Asian record. So at the presentation, the three of us were sitting there, and I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with Noguchi, who at that time was the Olympic champion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was the most incredible experience for me as somebody aspiring to go to the Olympics, to sit next to the Olympic champion and see that she was just an ordinary person. And
Japan has an incredible, as you say, you described it as a marathon superpower, and I think, you know, outside of East Africa, Japan consistently is the most dominant nation in both men's and women's marathon running, I argue. And particularly in the women's marathon, Adimori Yuko probably going to get this wrong, but I think silver in Barcelona, bronze in Atlanta, and then Takahashi Naoko winning in Sydney and Noguchi Mizuki winning in Athens. There were 4 consecutive games where Japan medaled, women's side, and numerous world championships that had medalists. So really, you know, just an incredible tradition and depth of talent. So as a female marathon runner in Japan, were you mixing with, did you train with one of the company running teams? Did you train on your own? What was the setup? Yeah, so I didn't join a Jitsugyodan team, partly because I was already quite old. I was already 33 when I moved to Japan as an athlete, and I felt that I just wasn't able to do the level of training that those teams did. I mean, they train just so unbelievably hard. It's incredible. And I was just a bit fearful that I would get injured or run down. But I did, for example, if I went on altitude training trips to, for example, Sugadaira in Nagano-ken, I would often be staying in the same Minshuku as Jitsugyodan teams doing altitude training. So I could see what their training was like, how often they trained, what they were eating, etc. So I was never a part of a corporate team, but I was exposed to them a bit in training and competition. So I developed a little bit of an understanding of what they were doing. But for me as an athlete, as an athlete in the marathon, in the women's marathon, spending time in Japan was probably the best thing I could ever do, because there's so much depth in Japan.
They perhaps don't win as many top flight races as the East African women do, but the depth is so phenomenal. And the level of competition in Japan is really second to none. You know, you've got these major marathons like Osaka, Saitama, previously Yokohama, Nagoya. Then you've got big half marathons. And, you know, the level of support from the media, from sponsors, from the general public, from the teams themselves is in a whole nother league compared to what's happening in other countries. So I was extremely lucky to be in that environment, and it was a really stimulating and great environment to learn in.
So that brings us really nicely onto, I mean, how you feel about this as one of your, I think you've mentioned this as one of your top performances after finishing, you know, other than finishing 6th in Beijing, which is an incredible performance. Winning the Osaka Kokusai Joshi Marathon, the Osaka International Women's Marathon. I was saying to Michael, we were laughing about this before we came on, that I watched the YouTube clip. I think it's a Japanese clip. And you flew past, I think it was it Fukushi, yes. And the camera crew completely ignored you. They'd gone for a few seconds and just solely kept focusing on Fukushi as if, no, she's still winning. She's still in the lead. And I'm going, now Mara shot past without even a look. You didn't. I don't think you even looked sideways. It flew off to win. How was that, both in terms of, you know, beating an up and coming Japanese female marathon, you know, star in the making, winning in Japan, so on, you know, on her home soil. How did that change things for you, you know, personally in terms of your career, but also what was the reaction in Japan like when you smashed it that day?
Well, Osaka was the one and only marathon I ever won in my whole career. So it was very, very special. I mean, marathon running, for the vast majority of people, is a time trial. You know, every marathon, the number of people who line up on the start line thinking, I'm going to try and win this race, is minuscule. So when you're actually racing and attempting to win, and then you do win, it's phenomenal. For example, the London Marathon, I ran it 6 times, but realistically, the chances of me ever winning those 6 outings was quite small. I came second once, but realistically, I wasn't in the league of the athletes who won. But with Osaka, to win it was very, very special. And also because the previous summer at the World Championships, which were held in Osaka on the same course, I messed up my tactics and finished in 9th, which was a bit of a disappointing result. So to go back to Osaka on the same course and run a much better judged race felt like a bit of just a learning process. But that race was Fukushi's marathon debut. She's known as the queen of the track, phenomenal athlete, you know, darling of the Japanese athletics scene. So the race was all about her and her debut. But she went off at way inside 2:20 pace. And there was no way I could run that time. So I and all the other athletes went off at about 2:25 pace. And she just was out of sight within minutes of the start. And I just thought, it's totally pointless me going with her. You know, I'll let her go. If she wins, that's fantastic for her. If she comes back to us, we've all got a chance. And that's what happened. So she started really struggling at about 34k, something like that. And you can see from the pace that I and the other members of the second group passed her that, you know, we were going much faster than her by that stage. So, you know, she's become a fantastic marathon runner despite that debut. You know, she won the bronze medal, I think it was, at the Moscow 2013 World Champs. She's run fast times. So her debut didn't go to plan, but it was a learning experience, as every debut marathon is. And I think in those big Japanese marathons, I think they all want a Japanese to win, you know, as we would want a Brit to win the London Marathon or any country. You know, having a domestic athlete win a massive race on home soil, there's something very special about that. So I ruined their party in that sense, but
they forgave you though, I'm sure.
I hope so. Yeah.
How did winning that marathon in Japan affect your profile? Because you were still living there at the time.
Yes.
Did that change the way people reacted to you and the way you were approached by other Japanese athletes?
It did a little bit, I think. You know, winning one of those Japanese races, people know who you are. They know your name. You know, they take you seriously when you toe the start line again in another race. You know, there are so many phenomenal Japanese athletes. Just because you win one race, it doesn't mean you're going to win again necessarily. And I didn't. You know, the depth is phenomenal. And if you have some success, you know, within straight away there'll be youngsters snapping at your heels. So it's not like you're suddenly on top and you can relax. But it did give me a lot of confidence, and that was the year of the Beijing Olympics, so it gave me confidence going into that competition. The only sad thing about the Osaka Marathon was that Konstantina Tomescu, who won the Olympics later that year, was in that race, and I defeated her. But that's marathon racing. You win some, you lose some.
Perfect. I can testify to the fact that marathon running is tough, having never run a decent one. You can ask anybody about that one. Completely failed, and that was why I went to Japan, was to try and discover the secret of Japanese marathon runners' endurance and their mindset. And I kind of convinced myself that it was all about, you know, steely determination, putting up with, you know, lots of learning to suffer, if you will. What do you attribute this incredible success of Japanese marathon runners, men and women, too?
One factor is the Jitsugyodan system, the corporate team system. So it's very professional, it's very well funded, it's very well organized, lots of resources, and athletes can train in an excellent environment with a lot of support without having to worry about how they're going to make a living. So as a nation, it's an excellent system because you've got a lot of throughput of talented youngsters, and some of them will, you know, if you have thousands coming into the system each year, of those, a few will win medals at the Olympics or the World Champs or become exceptional athletes. So that's one factor. Another is the Japanese sort of stoicism. You know, Japanese are famous for gaman, you know, just hanging in there, suffering stoically, which you have to do in the marathon. It takes a lot of training. It's a long race. You put yourself through pain for hours in the race, and, you know, untold hours in training. So I think their national kind of identity, of course I'm overgeneralizing here, but their national identity and sort of that culture is conducive to marathon running.
And what about food? I read an article, it did make me laugh. This is the thing that really made me laugh when we were researching this. And I think there's an article in the Japan Times that said you were renowned for eating 6 omochi, so rice cakes, and a bowl of miso shiru. And the bit of this that made me laugh was that the journalist felt, and not representing all of Japanese male society, just to help him out, it said 6 rice cakes is an exceedingly large amount of carbohydrate, even for a normal male, he said. And it did make me smile because it illustrated certain facets of Japanese society we probably shouldn't mention too much. But what about Japanese food? And we know you love to cook, and you know you're writing blogs at the moment and recipes for World Athletics. How did Japanese food figure in your life?
Well, of course, I absolutely love Japanese food. I mean, as most people do. There's so much variety. It's so healthy. It's very much in line with the seasons and the weather, and you know, things like eating somen in summer or unagi, or in winter having hot nabes, that sort of thing. It's very much geared towards making you feel better. So I absolutely love Japanese food. I tried a lot when I was in Japan to cook Japanese food and learn it and have lessons. So I did and still do cook Japanese food, whether it's nice or not. Well, compared to cooking Japanese food, I'm sure it's terrible. But I enjoy just having a go and trying it. And one thing I'm trying to do more of now is, what struck me living in Japan is the range of vegetables. So, so many really gorgeous vegetables and cooked in such a variety of ways. And a lot of those vegetables aren't commonly available here. But actually in the UK, we have some really special nice vegetables. Like, for example, parsnips, they can be quite sweet. So what I'm trying to do now is using vegetables freely available in the UK and make them in a Japanese style. So trying to make the best of what we have freely available here, but drawing on Japanese ways of preparing them.
Yeah, because we're in the middle of the UK Japan season of culture, got interrupted somewhat by the pandemic, and a lot of events have been cancelled. But Japanese food is high on the agenda of Japan in terms of promoting culture overseas. We've seen boom in interest in Japanese food over here, even to the extent we've got ramen in London now. So it clearly plays a huge role in Japanese culture and society, and probably contributed to both your and my running over the years.
Oh, definitely. I mean, one thing I learned and really love about Japanese food is ways of eating. So, for example, if you go out to a meal with lots of people, you quite often end up eating the same things. So, for example, if you order lots of dishes and share, what's special about that is you're all eating the same food, and you can comment on, that dish is tasty or goes well with that dish. And you can bond over your food, which you can't do if, for example, you each order a separate main dish and they're all completely separate. They're all different. So that I really love, and also just, for example, you typically have rice or carbohydrate at the end of a meal, which is good in terms of keeping your blood sugar more stable. Loads of variety and loads of vegetables, which of course is healthy. What I learned about ways of eating in Japan was without doubt good for my health, and I miss it now that I'm living in UK, because I eat too much sort of chocolate and cakes is my vice, and I eat too much of them here.
Because I'm obsessed with food as well, but something I found when I was living in Japan certainly was I missed British food, certainly some facets of it. And then when I came to the UK, I missed lots of Japanese food. Was there anything when you were living out there that you were absolutely desperate to get your hands on that just couldn't for love nor money?
Fig rolls and Horlicks.
That's quite niche. Right?
They're not famous for being especially tasty foods, but fig rolls, I like them because they're just little snacks. They're a bit sweet, and as runners, you're always hungry. So I often used to have a couple of fig rolls before I'd go out for a run, for example. And I couldn't easily find them in Japan. And then Horlicks, I drank Horlicks when I was a child. So it was one of those foods which gives me a sense of comfort. And I know it's an acquired taste. Lots of people don't like it. So those were two things that when I came back to the UK while I was living in Japan, I would buy a few packets and stick them in my suitcase for the return journey.
I was much the same. Mine was Marmite and wine gums, which is a significantly less healthy version.
But now I'm in the UK. I think the one Japanese food that I really miss is unagi, because you can buy unagi here, but it's not that tasty. I mean, I've had fantastic unagi once or twice in really good Japanese restaurants in central London, but you have to seek it out, and it's not widely available. But well-made unagi in Japan is just amazing.
Unagi being eel, yeah.
Eel, yeah, grilled eel with a special sauce.
I'd never eaten it, and I'd always stayed away from it because I'm a little bit careful around seafood. And we were in Tsukiji last year, just before it closed for its original location. And I thought we were with a group of people do a park run, and I thought it was only polite to try it, and it was amazing. Honestly, I don't know why I've been shy of eating it for 20 years. But moving back to Japan's sport.
Obviously, today should have been the day that the Olympics was due to kick off. We've now got to wait an extra year before it starts. What do you think that extra year, what impact do you think that's going to have on the sort of games as a general, and especially the games in Japan?
Well, in terms of, it's undoubtedly a big burden for Japan, I imagine. You know, the Olympics is an enormous global event and takes so many years of preparation, and to postpone all that, you know, I just can't imagine the work and the cost that it's involving. But if any country can do it, it's Japan, without a doubt. So I really, really hope that it does go ahead next summer. We just don't know at the moment how COVID is going to progress, but I really, really, really hope that it does go ahead. It's been such a shame that this has happened for Japan, because they're so sports mad, organize these big events brilliantly. You know, everything about the Tokyo Olympics just looked like it was going to be amazing, and to have had to postpone is such a shame. But if it can't go ahead next year, that will just be, I just don't want to think about it. So let's hope it does go ahead. But I think there have been positive things to come out of this public health crisis. So, for example, there's evidence to show that people are more physically active, which is a good thing. Pollution has gone down, you know, air travel has plummeted. So the impact of those sorts of things on climate change. I think people are really focusing on what's really, really important. So there have been a lot of positive things. And in terms of the Olympics, I read recently that the hosts are thinking of putting on a much simplified version of the Olympics. And I think that can only be a good thing. You know, the Olympics comes in for criticism of excessive money spending, corruption, the venues becoming white elephants, the impact on the host population, the host city population, they're not always so keen. So as much as it's a fantastic sporting event, there are downsides to the Olympics. And I think if Japan can put on a slimmed down, essentials only kind of event, which really makes us think about value for money, climate change, the impact on the local population, human rights, all those kind of issues which are so important, then I think that will be a good thing.
I think the Japanese Olympics minister is smiling somewhere listening to you say that, Mara. I totally agree with you. I think if we can get to a point where sports is a little more humble, it's athlete-centric, but, you know, in the case of Tokyo, you know, shows us the very best of Japan, then it will be an incredible games.
Obviously, apart from the 2020 Olympics, we had the 2019 Rugby World Cup, and then thinking way back, we had the 2002 FIFA World Cup jointly held with South Korea. Where do you think these mega events sit within Japan, and what impact do they have on Japanese sport in general, and, you know, especially the impact it has on young people looking at a sporting career in the future?
I think they're overwhelmingly positive. I mean, the Rugby World Cup in Japan was, by all accounts, an amazing event, and I think the Japanese hospitality, omotenashi, to visitors is on display at its absolute best at these big events. And in terms of athletics, particularly my sport, one thing I'm really excited about for Japanese athletics looking a bit forward is the men's sprinting. So, you know, Japanese 4x1 men's relay team have won 2 Olympic medals in recent years, and upcoming athletes like Sani Brown, you know, that's Japan in terms of world sprinting is not right up there, but when they get into the relay, they're really formidable. And I think that teamwork and how brilliantly they're drilled on their handovers really shines through. And also race walking. So last year I was commentating in Doha at the World Championships, and Suzuki Yusuke won the men's 50k, and Toshikazu Yamanishi won the 20k men's race walk. And race walking in Japan is really going places. So those are 2 particular events within athletics that I think we could see some fireworks at the Tokyo Olympics.
A win in Tokyo would be incredible. And I think, again, you know, just, you know, for the amount of work and passion that the whole of Japan's put into the games. So much as I'd like to see GB win by the 4x1, I think a Japanese victory would also make me a very happy man in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about the relays is, you know, anything can happen. however good you are, if you're a USA or a Great Britain or Jamaica, you can screw up the baton changes, and then teams like Japan are right there behind you and going to win medals. So, you know, Japan winning gold in the men's 4x1 in Tokyo is not out of the question, and that would just be historic.
Every podcast finishes with a few quirky questions, and we didn't want to be outdone. So, Japanese. We know you're a fluent Japanese speaker. So, one piece of one Japanese phrase or a word that you can teach us. And this can be a word that sums up your experience or feelings about Japan, or equally something you think that the listeners might find useful if they decide to go to Japan.
So there are a number of phrases and words in Japanese which don't easily translate into English. I'll give you some examples. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Osewa ni narimasu. Osewa ni natte orimasu. Gaman suru. Mendokusai.
These are all great examples, but we've probably got listeners now going, oh my goodness, what was the first one?
So, yoroshiku onegai shimasu. I remember trying to learn that when I was in Japan learning Japanese. And I just thought, what is this? Everybody says it, you hear it all the time, but what does it mean? And you really can't translate it into English, but what it means is it's somebody who you hope is going to help you in some way. And you're saying to them, I'm going to be asking for your help. I hope that's okay, and please help me. It's kind of like that, but I mean, that's a very clumsy translation because it really doesn't translate into English well. But it's a recognition of the sort of bond you have with somebody who's going to be helping you.
It's a brilliant way to translate it. I've seen some recent YouTube clips of people trying to make the tales of Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Mike and I have both struggled when we were doing some teaching.
Another quick phrase is osewa ni natte orimasu, which is kind of the opposite of Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. So it's recognizing that you are indebted to somebody who's helping you. And that, I think that's really nice, because if somebody's helping you, it's nice to show your appreciation and your recognition of what
and very representative of Japanese culture and the way that people will think about you as a visitor and the way that you think about them when you're connecting with them and working with them. Perfect.
So the next three we've got three things we're going to ask for you to recommend to us or to everybody listening. The first one is one place to visit within Japan.
Wow, that's difficult. There's so many great places to visit, but perhaps Kamakura. So I spent a year in Kamakura learning Japanese. It's an ancient capital full to the brim of Japanese culture and history, lots of shrines and temples. It's by the seaside. It's within striking distance of Tokyo. The giant Buddha is there. But it's also small enough that you can walk around in a day, and it has the wonderful Enoden little train, which is a single gauge train going through the town. So that would be top of my list.
Yeah, that was one of the last things I did before I left Japan at the end of my time living there, and I think that was an absolutely fabulous thing to put on a list of, to do whilst you're out there for the Olympics or any other reason. The second thing we want from you is recommend one thing to do, something that you did in Japan that would really kind of went, I could only do this in Japan, and it really gave me a good memory.
Yeah, I would say, one very unique thing I've done in Japan is have a hot sand bath. That was in Kagoshima-ken, I believe. That's a bit of a trek from Tokyo. So if you can't do that, well, visiting an onsen, a natural hot spring bath, it's very, the way Japanese do onsen is really special. If you could visit an outdoor onsen, a rotemburo, even better. I mean, in July and August, if it's people going for the Olympics, it might not be that appealing in the middle of summer. It's better to go in winter. But that's a really special experience. But also a very typical Japanese restaurant. So I used to visit a little tiny family-run tempura-yasan in Shibuya. And it only sat about 6 people, and you would sit at the counter, and the mother of the family would make tempura in front of you. that kind of thing is also very, very special.
And the last thing we'd like for you is one thing to eat.
Impossible, this one, isn't it?
Ooh.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned tempura and unagi. Everybody's heard of sushi. I love Japanese snacks. I mean, when I first went to Japan, I had a chocolate urge, and I went to a shop and I bought what I thought was a chocolate biscuit, but it was a dorayaki. So it had bean paste in the middle of two little sort of Scotch pancake type things. It was the biggest disappointment of the week. But after that, once I got chocolate out of my head, I kind of thought, actually, these are quite tasty. So the things like dorayaki, or just the little buns with bean paste inside, or sweet potato sweets, kuri, chestnut sweets. All of these little typically Japanese sweets are, really tasty. And if you're a runner and always hungry, then I recommend them.
We should also, actually, while we got you there, we should add another recommendation. Okay, one place you'd recommend for a run in Japan.
Ooh,
favorite place to run in Japan.
Favorite place to run, yeah. I mean, I actually really loved running around the Imperial Palace. It's very well known, everybody does it, but there's something about, it's pretty much exactly 5K. It's a bit hilly. You can see so much of Tokyo on that loop. You see the British Embassy at Hanzomon. You see the financial district Otemachi. Of course, you're right next to the Imperial Palace and the moat. Then you go up towards the Budokan. So you see a lot of Japanese history and central Tokyo, and maybe not so much culture, but you can take in a lot on that loop. I run in Yoyogi Koen a lot as well, which I really love, and also Kinuta Koen. So if you seek out these places, there are lots of lovely places to run.
Fabulous. I think that we couldn't have had a better guest for our Daikai Japan Sports Stories podcast. You've been absolutely fantastic, Mara. You've given up so much of your Sunday to spend with us. How can people get in touch? Where can they find you on social media? What are you going to be up to now?
I'm mainly on Twitter, so I'm at Mara_Yamauchi on Twitter, and I also have a website, marayamauchi.com. If anybody would like to get in touch, that's the best way.
And I've heard Mara speak. She's an absolutely fantastic speaker, second fastest female marathon runner in the UK. So anybody who's interested in becoming a faster runner, learning more about Japan, learning more about Japanese food, Mara is definitely the person to go to. Thank you so much again for giving up your time. 本当にどうもありがとうございました。
Yeah, thank you both very much for having me. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 1 of Japan Sports Stories. Both Noel and I are doing this for the pure love of Japan and sport, and we'd love to hear your feedback on how we're doing. Feel free to get in touch with us with suggestions, compliments, or anything at all to do with sport in Japan. You can email us at jsstories@gmail.com or get in touch with us on Twitter @JSStories. If you really liked what you heard, why not leave us a review on your preferred podcasting platform? Go on, you know you want to. While you're at it, if you want to hear more from us, be sure to subscribe so you can be notified of our next release. Once again, I'd like to thank Mara for being our first guest and giving us a fantastic start.